But importantly, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the country of where I'm coming from today, and I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples here in Canberra. And I encourage you online to use the chat function to let us know where you're coming from in this great, wonderful land of ours. I acknowledge the waterways, the land, the sky, and all who inhabit this place, this country. I acknowledge their ancestors and elders and recognise those who continue to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. I acknowledge the past and stand together with First Nations people in a true expression of reconciliation with hopes and aspirations for the future. I also wish to acknowledge in particular Sarah today, who is making the presentation, and to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining this webinar. So FRSA is delighted to be hosting our First Nations Focus on Family and Relationship Services series, which will be running from August to November. Sarah graciously has put her hand up and said, yep, I'm happy to be the first one. So thanks again, Sarah. But we were very grateful to her for making a presentation on this topic at our conference, which was held in May, and strong attendance in the room on that day, which was fabulous. So today's presenter is Sarah Decrea from Relationships Australia, South Australia. Sarah is a proud Torres Strait Islander woman working on Kaurna country, and I'm sure she'll introduce herself. And she is as practice manager for family-led decision-making across FRSA. She provides cultural information and guidance to mainstream, culturally diverse and Aboriginal staff. So today's presentation, as Sarah said earlier, is a real passion of hers, which is a focus on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership as best practice in child protection, and it's the family group conferencing program. So we're looking forward to a discussion or a presentation on the transformative power of Aboriginal-led leadership when it comes to finding solutions for Aboriginal children, families and communities. I am going to step out very shortly and leave Sarah to begin the presentation. Questions will be at the end, if that's okay, after Sarah finishes. If you have anything burning that comes up you don't want to lose, I encourage you to use the chat function, and that can be a bit of a reference point for us. So Sarah, once again, my sincere thanks, and I'll hand over to you and come back join you at the end to see whether I can assist with any Q&A.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to put straight into the PowerPoint so we can get going. And so I'll just play. Hello, my name is Sarah Decrea. I work for Relationships Australia, South Australia, and I'm the Practice Manager of Family-Led Decision Making at Relationships Australia. I'm a proud sub-island woman from Zendith, and I'm going to be presenting on Aboriginal leadership in the child protection space. Hello, thank you all for joining me online today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the lands that I meet on and coming to you from, and I'm meeting here on the lands of the Kaurna people. I'd like to pay my respect to all Kaurna elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge their cultural, emotional, spiritual ties to this country, the waterways, the sea and the hills. It is important for us as a people to honour and acknowledge those that have came before us, but it's also our responsibility to teach, lead and grow those who will come after us. And I'd like to thank all my elders, especially my strong black mother, for doing this so honourably. I stand on the shoulders of their daily battles won, the sacrifices and commitments they gave for our families, community and children. The tradition and values they refused to compromise and sell out created a path and a platform for me and many others to have a voice and to be heard. So acknowledge all the lands that we are meeting on today. Thank you. Right way partnership as a fire metaphor. How do we get together in collaboration as Aboriginal leaders to put families' voice Aboriginal families' voice and children's voice at the heart of child protection. We had a fire that was burning inside all of us, and that fire was the ethical pain that kept us turning up for work and that kept us advocating for our children and families. We wanted to reduce the amount of babies being removed from the hospital, and we wanted to reduce the amount of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children entering state care. We had to start with the fuel, the why. Why, as Aboriginal women in leadership from different organisations, did we want to create a partnership that could put family-led decision-making and family group conference as the focus for systems change? It's why I stuck that quote in the corner. Men may have discovered fire, but women discovered how to play with it. As women, we knew something needed to change, and it was simple. If you want to create change, you need to change the decision-making process, and for too long, our families had not had a seat at the decision-making table. The child protection system and agencies regulated risks, and professionals were the experts on our families and our children. The focus was narrow. It focused in on child and parents, and most of the time, that focusing on child and parents just included the mother. Professionals defined the terms and the rules of engagement, and our families just had to fit in. There was a menu of agencies and services, all imposed from top-down solutions, and this led to a 116.3% increase in the number of Aboriginal children in care in South Australia between 2011 to 2021. This is a wicked problem. This wicked problem of child removal for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children has been happening since the Bringing Them Home report. It's been happening since the Stolen Generation. It's produced many reports since the mid-90s with the Bringing Them Home report, Ted Mulligan's 2008 report, and Nyland's Royal Commission. The cumulative harm created by removing children from their families and placing them into out-of-home care has been recognised since the mid-90s. Despite this, in South Australia, the last 10 years have seen a significant increase in the number of children, especially Aboriginal children, being removed from their families and communities. Most recently in May 2024, April Laurie, the Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People, reported into her inquiry on the application of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principles that Aboriginal children make up just 5.5% of all children in South Australia, but they represent 37.4% of all children in out-of-home care in South Australia. 94 in every 1,000 Aboriginal children in South Australia is an Aboriginal child in out-of-home care, compared to 8 in every 1,000 for non-Aboriginal children. This is predicted to rise to 140 in every 1,000 by 2031 if we don't start to change the decision making. 62% of Aboriginal children in South Australia in out-of-home care are in non-Aboriginal care. We believe that family group conferencing offers a significant solution to changing this wicked problem. By believing in family group conference, we can make a crucial investment in the lives of children and young people, as well as their families and networks, which will contribute to the well-being of an entire community. We want something different. We want children at the heart of strategy for social and economical growth. We want the brilliance of Aboriginal culture to direct our practice. We want long-term outcomes over short-term safety. We want holistic lens of children's identities and relationships because they are bound up within their families, communities and culture. We want to see families are the experts on themselves. We know that providing real help in partnership with families protects children more than external surveillance and control. We needed the oxygen for this fire to start and to go somewhere, to really create flame and heat. And that oxygen was the deep listening to each other, to sit in our stories, to have a shared understanding of our history. We use the way we have done business forever in time, and that was in relationship. We know all things are connected and interconnected. We are connected through our bloodlines, our kinship systems, our country, our cultural practices, our stories. We use restorative practice with each other because it was the closest things to First Nations practice that we could find. And the restorative practices focuses on building relationships that create change. And creating change sometimes requires challenge as well as support, which to me is truth-telling. A critical concept underpinning restorative practice is the idea of balancing high challenge with high support. For too long in the work I had done, I'd pushed up against the system. I did not work with or in partnership. Historical traumas has led us to an us versus them. We had to sit in deep listening with child protection. We had to find and create safe places to truth tell with each other and not lose sight of children. This led to the sharing of power, because power is not constant or fixed. It's not that DCP hold 90% of the power, but what power is capable of doing is increasing and decreasing. It can move in and out, because power is not a matter of social coercion and domination. Instead, you can use power, and we use power and made it flow right for a social system's potential. What we do is you use power to coordinate human activity and resources to accomplish goals, and that is what we did. To keep the heat going, change occurs in authentic relationships, and we started to have authentic relationships with each other, with the families, with the children, and that led to trust, which meant DCP shared power with us, and then we could share power with the family. With working with our DCP leaders and colleagues like Ailey Blanche, we were able to create a system of care over creating a system of policing. The DCP practice principles recognise the strength of Aboriginal approaches to parenting, Aboriginal family decision making, and the importance of ensuring Aboriginal children and young people maintain connection to culture. Family Group Conference aligns with best practice. It is an enabler of the crucial pillars of practice, including child-centred, cultural safety, strengthening of families, supporting carers in partnership and collaboration, and supports a learning culture through the deep listening of family stories. So what did our families need? What our family needed was healing. And healing occurs when safe spaces are created for people to share their story. Again, it is the deep listening. I have no right to judge your story, but I can connect. When people can share their story safely and not be judged, but understood and heard, there is a justice. And when people feel they've had a justice, there is a healing. Ngā Tuicha Family Group Conferencing is more than a decision-making process. It is a healing process. For too long, disintegrative shaming has been used in child protection, and the focus is not only on the act that's actually committed, but on the person as a whole, pushing people into their compass of shame and to be excluded from the solution process. Ngā Tuicha Family Group Conferencing puts the problem at the centre, and it gets safety organised with clear bottom lines. What is the harm? Then we widen the circle, and those most affected by the decision are at the decision-making circle, especially children, because children have the right for space. Children must be given safe, inclusive opportunities to form and express their views. Children have the right for a voice. Children must be facilitated to express their views. They have the right for an audience. That means their view must be listened to, and they have the right to influence, which means their view must be acted upon as appropriate. This uses reintegrative shaming, focusing on the incident, on the action, and not the person as a whole. We use shame to create change, not to punish or blame. Our law, LORE law, was not punitive. You get punished for the act and then it is dealt with. Our families needed trauma responsive, and there is such an easy way to do a trauma responsive, and that's by using a circle. A circle is protection and safety, whose boundaries help encourage sharing and confidentiality. As humans and as social beings, we have always lived in families, clans and tribes. We began sitting in circles around the fires for protection, shelter from the elements, and to share rituals. We told stories, we conveyed our oral histories, we reinforced social contracts, spiritual practices and beliefs around circles. The circles allow us to sit in story, to connect. It is the act of the ditty, the deep listening. The circle is both an image and a metaphor of completeness and equality. There is no hierarchy. There is both protection and democracy within its confines as people face each other without the visual hierarchy. It facilitates intimacy. Intimacy has been described in many ways, and one of my favourites is for intimacy is into me you see. My daughter just recently told me I think that I might have stolen that from The Love Guru, and I can't stand that movie, but apparently that's where it's from. But we use First Nations ways of conflict resolution. And in our First Nations ways of conflict resolution, we have emotional responses. It's done orally. Training is prior experience. There's no rules of evidence. The process is done in front of community and clan. The disputants speak, and time is not an issue. It's an informal and a non-hierarchical process, which pushes directly up with the Western process, which is a controlled response. It is written, it is formal, it is a formal training, it has strict rules of evidence, and the process is in front of usually strangers, and advocates speak, and it's deadline intensive and very formal. So bringing these two worlds together is understanding the difference, is that acknowledging that there is not one set is right or the other wrong. Western law is no more important than our law processes. What this describes is a difference in human cultural behaviours relevant to different societies. What is important is our awareness and validation of these differences. The challenge is how do we work towards recreating our old practices, our ceremonies that enable us to manage conflict and heal our communities. While we must acknowledge and embrace our old ways in management of conflict, we must also look at new ways, for our social structures have changed. This is walking two worlds. And what we've been able to do in Ngātuwitcha Family Group Conference is to really bring the two worlds together and have everyone sit to decolonise the system. And that's what comes when you invest in Aboriginal leadership. Ngātu Ngādli Kumaka Yara Kundamendi, which means now together we become one. We opened up our program in a Yarrapulti because we're living on Kaurna country. So Yarrapulti is a Kaurna word. Yarra expresses the notions of individuality and reciprocity, and Pulti means ceremony. We opened with the ceremony and continue to work in partnership with child protection and ceremony through our action research. We opened with the sister basket. In 1923, the Nudinjeri people walked this basket from Point Macleay to Parliament House, 150 kilometres, to protest against the bill of the removal of Aboriginal children. What they wrote was two forces arrayed against each other, one that passed the bill with their guns intellect. On the opposing side is a very strange army, possessing no weapons of war, no intellectual powers, no parliamentary eloquence. The only piece of artillery which this army possesses is the weapon called mother's love. I believe that the child protection system is still declaring war on mother's love, and is a war that cannot be won. We will keep fighting to ensure that all our children can feel and embrace their mother's love. The work that we've done in NFGC has allowed us now to do family group conferencing in the unborn child space. And so one of our yarras that we've done was we brought all the high-risk infant workers to the Yarrapulti, and they were 50 staff from across DCP and Ngātuwitch Family Group Conferencing, as well as Aboriginal Family Support Services Family Group Conferencing team were there. At that event, we asked, through a Minty survey, we asked a series of questions to the DCP social workers, and out of those questions, we asked 44 out of 44 DCP staff, 35 had been involved in a removal at birth. And these staff were asked how it felt to be involved in a removal at birth, and the majority of responses including sad, heart-wrenching, heartbreaking and horrible. 32 attendees had been involved in an unborn child concerned family group conference and were asked how it felt. And in contrast to the other feelings they expressed when involved in a removal, the responses to this question including feelings of hope and empowerment. Removals at birth skyrocketed in South Australia, and when we do removals at birth, what we do is we cause trauma. What we've done in the UCC space, even though sometimes we understand that sometimes babies can't go home with parents, but when there's a plan in place that family have brought forward and put to the table, what ends up happening is the removal is not traumatic. Everyone knows what's going on. Everyone is feeling safe and comfortable and knows what the future planning is. DCP often with our UCC's family group conference plans don't even have to attend the hospital, even if they're saying the baby's still not safe to go home. It allows dignity back to the mothers. It allows babies to come into the world with less trauma. And again, it gives families voice and power to create change they need in their family to be able to provide safety for this infant. It's doing remarkable. So this is some of our feedback from some of our parties that have come to a UCC or a family group conference. What we really want to focus in on in these family group conferences is for the children is where is their delight and joy, because we know that attachment relationships require delight, joy, connection and love that services really cannot provide. What really helps us in this process is the independency, because when we're independent we can notice and reflect back who in the family can be bigger, wiser, stronger, kind for these children when sometimes parents are unable to, for whatever reason. It creates, and we focus in on the healing and repair. It supports people to find opportunities for healing and repair in the way that is not shaming for families or for parents or for the child. Children in these meetings are witnessing rupture and repair in real time. This helps change this trauma story. When the adults in the children's lives help make meanings of the trauma they have experienced, they are more able to help the child co-regulate and move the narrative towards the behaviour that caused the harm. NFGC really focusing on resourcing the family. While the family are responsible for the decision making, the services are integral to support the family in resourcing and witnessing their change. It was positive to see that relationships and support were the common response to the questions regarding enabling factors when referring to a UCC family group conference. These comments related to good relationships between DCP and families, support from practice leaders, supervisors and other DCP leadership, and effective relationship with service providers. RASA attendees felt that transparency was a common factor that contributed to a successful UCC family group conference. Transparency with families about the child protection concern is needed to ensure families have all the information they need to help them make informed decisions. This including sharing relevant notifications, information relating to the child with the family. All attendees provide a range of positive outcomes they have seen in the UCC family group conference space, with the most common being stronger families and babies remaining within families. This slide is for our complete FGCs from October 2020 to 2022, and I'm just showing this because what it demonstrates is if we were just to have a ratio of child to DCP in an orthodox system, you'd have, 0.67 of a safe relationship for a child if you were just having child protection, keep a child safe. If you change that to a ratio of a child to family and no services brought together by a family group conference, you just done it by family and DCP, you'd have 2.1 safe relationships for a child. But by bringing everyone together, which is the child to an FGC and services and DCP and family, along to be this child's care team, you increase safe relationships to 4.1 for a child by using a family group conference to widen the circle. Like I said, these are numbers that were just done from when we started the program, January 2020 to 2022, and we've seen 439 children. I can now state that because we're just starting to do another data evaluation set, that we've, since the beginning of service to now, we have seen 1,526 children have been referred into Ngātawicha Family Group Conferencing, and that sits at a 95% success rate. So we have 95% agreed plans for these families. So we're keeping, quite a number, almost 90% of the children referred to us are staying out of the child protection system. And when I say an agreed plan, that means a plan that's signed off and usually leads to DCP closing. Consistently over the last 3 years, like I said, we've seen 90% of the family feedback and indicate that they were satisfied with the process and that they felt that the children were safer as a result. Department of Child Protection also undertook a review of families who participated in a family group conference by either RASA or AFS, and combined 92% of the families continued to safely care for their children 2 years on and did not re-enter the state system. So we're also showing that they're not coming back through the door. There is going to be a report released soon to show just how well NFGC and AFS in the family group conference space are producing very good outcomes for children in South Australia. What this shows is the levels of agreement with Aboriginal families and non-Aboriginal families, and what you can see is that they're pretty on par. So the FGC completion and agreement rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families was the same as all other families involved, and this is implying that the process is not oppressive or unequal with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. And so what we've heard from Paul Nixon and other people from around the globe in the Kemp conference is what our FGCs are being able to show is that we are taking what you might call cultural bias out of the child protection system. So what they have seen in other jurisdictions and countries around the world where FGCs are optional pathway, because they're still an optional pathway at South Australia, it's a voluntary process if families want to be involved. So where there's an optional pathway for decision making in child protection, in other countries there's a much lower rate of referrals submitted for Indigenous, Black or called families, and the rates of reaching valid agreements are much lower as well. So what we're showing is we're showing a trend in light of the gross overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in state care in South Australia. We're showing that people are wanting to make a difference, that our system is looking for a different way of doing decision making. So, we're also showing that we are using a Relationships Australia is a big NGO, and what we've been able to show here is that we're using a First Nations model for all families and getting the exact same outcomes for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal families, which does mean that actually Aboriginal knowledge bases should be taken into consideration.
What else would you say to a young person, this is how you can get ready for your meeting?
That at the meeting we'll just be asking you some questions and that we would be asking your family too. When you feel scared, try to breathe in and out. Try to be as brave as you can. And if you feel like no one will listen to you, it's okay. A lot of people feel the same, and that you don't feel like you're the only person there. If you think no one's there for you, just believe in that your family are there for you, and that no matter what, they'll always be around.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership will truth tell. It will challenge. It will demand accountability. But most of all, it will lead with love. Our system, our families, but most of all, our children need Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership. And I'm not just talking about in Aboriginal community controlled organisations. I'm talking about investing in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership in all spaces of child protection, non-government, government. If you invest in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership, you will change the outcomes for our families. So we'd like to close the session by thanking you all for joining me today, and my heartfelt gratitude to the team at the FRSA for inviting me to share this in this online version. And I'd like to just thank everyone for stepping in and wanting to make a difference in children's lives. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I don't know why you're doing the thanking in this direction. That's pretty amazing stuff, and you must be feeling particularly proud about your, the data that you were reporting on in terms of a 95% success rate as you're looking at the moment for 2 years plus, which is phenomenal. So congratulations to you and your team. I think the other thing is that learning that we have is about that you've been able to remove the cultural bias there. So the family group conferencing that you've been using has worked for non-First Nations people too. So that's wonderful that you've also been providing those options. But most importantly, this, success. I must say at the beginning of your presentation, my heart did sink in terms of the reality of that. You were saying that 94 in every 1,000 children that were removed were First Nations, compared to 8 in mainstream population. So they're really damning figures. So you must be feeling incredibly proud of what you've been able to do through this program. So congratulations.
Thank you. Totally, we are proud of it, and we want to see it expand out, because I just think if we want to create some systems change for our children, we really need to think differently. And so, what I didn't touch on there is how much work we do with perpetrators of violence, and being able to bring them still into the solution process and making them accountable for behaviour in the child protection space. Children to see men be able to speak about the way they've used violence and see how they can change when, sometimes for the first time, they're hearing the experience from their child themselves, and you see the penny drop in that space around putting that accountability straight back to fathers around what are the expectations of them being a father, instead of putting all that pressure just on mum, is actually ensuring that that person who's doing the harm is there to help create the solutions that need to keep this child safe. And for too long, we've kind of pushed them out to not put the responsibility back where it needs to be, and put so much pressure on mothers to do everything. So, again, we are, we love the family decision. We make We see beautiful things happen in those circles. And we often can't talk about you have to be there to witness it. People that you hear go, oh, that family will never come up with a decision, but to see them do their healing and do their, really nut it out. These aren't meetings that always are smooth or people are always nice. They're meeting where people are talking about children and feelings and really nutting out their problems. We've had meetings that can go for 8 hours while families nut out what they need to nut out so they can keep that child safe. And so it is a different way of thinking, and there's a lot of work up front, but you're going to get better outcomes. You're going to get a lot of long-term safety is what we're showing. So you're going to get long-term safety for a child, not just a quick fix and then back through the door. What we're looking for is not to bring these families keep coming back through the door, but to help them go out and do their work to keep their children safe within their family.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a very important points there. I'm conscious that we've still got people on the line, okay, and we have got a few minutes. We've got a few minutes for Q&A. Due to our group size, you are now in control of your own cameras and your own speakers. So if you wanted to ask a question or make any comments at all, please feel free either to raise your hand or pop your camera on and I can invite you into the conversation. Bernice, I can see that you're popping in the chat. You must work in the Queensland government space or in the Queensland government or an area that's controlled by the Queensland government. And you've certainly made some comments there about encouraging the Queensland government to do something along the same lines and agreeing about the children as victims the voiceless victims in domestic violence. I think one of the things that really struck me too about the child maltreatment study that was released last year is that so many of those that participated in responding to that, landmark study are actually probably the people who had been, who were victims of family violence, and indeed those children who are also in our family law system and programs as well, and before the family court. So as you said, Sarah, you work very hard to have longevity, that people are not, coming back, and that they build the strength and resilience to be able to work as family and as community to keep those children or child safe.
And those two systems, Jackie, don't usually work very well together. When you have the family law system and the child protection system, like the two don't gel very well together, especially in South Australia around when it goes from a child protection into a family law, or is it family law going into child protection? And what we found, which we weren't expecting to find, but we found it, was a lot of our Aboriginal families were in the child protection space when they actually should have been in the family law space. It was family conflict. And for some reason, it was sitting in child protection. And just because of Relationships Australia's work in the family law space, we could go, actually, this is why it's not being resolved here, because this is not child protection. You haven't got harm, you've got family conflict. So we happen to try to work out how we can streamline some of those to take them out of that space and put them into the family law space, mediation, consent orders, which are more viable to families to keep children out of care in that space, but found it a lot for Aboriginal families that they were sitting in a child protection space.
And I think that there was last week some announcements, or there was the Family Circuit Court clearly are acknowledging that there is work that they can do that brings families into their system to do exactly that, to look at conflict and how they can resolve that and build safety around children. That means that they don't have to go into the child protection system. But you're clearly already doing that in this space outside of the courts, which is one of the things that our sector does particularly well, doesn't it? So in terms of these things that you're able to achieve, and regrettably in terms of stopping that trajectory that you sort of pointed to, I think beginning of your presentation, was that there was concerns that by 2030 there'd be something
Yep.
like 140
Yep.
First Nations children in every 1,000. That requires fairly intensive work to turn it around, or just stop that flow. What do you believe makes the difference? One, there is this program, certainly, but what would help you to achieve that? Is it about resourcing? Is it about being able to upscale? Because I suppose that's a thing in the big systems, isn't it? It's about how do you upscale to a point that really makes a difference, and quite conscious that there's a lot being asked of First Nations people, of First Nations people in mainstream, and then of course Aboriginal community controlled organisations, as we are acknowledging that there is a need for us to shift, the way that things are operating. So what do you think would make the significant difference from your perspective?
Collaboration, Jackie. How do we work together in this space instead of working against pushing up against each other? I think working more collaboratively together is going to help our families. Early intervention, we focus so much at the back end, especially in South Australia. I think 80% of our funding is spent in out-of-home care, which means that we're under the national average in South Australia for early intervention. We spend 30% less than the national standard of early intervention in the intensive family support services. And if you want to make that difference, you've got to invest up that front. And I think we've got to learn to hold risk together. For too long, it's easy just to go too risky, remove the child, when actually, how do we work with risk, and how do we work in risk and hold it a little bit more together, so it's not just child protection that holds risk and everyone else is not holding it. We've got to learn to hold it together. Otherwise, we'll just keep producing the same. We've got to think about different decision-making processes. We've got to think about how we do this work together, which does require partnerships, relationships. We need to go back to those relational models. We had, in Relationship Australia, in South Australia, we've all come behind the fierce Joe Wilmot, who has always said, if Relationships Australia can't bloody do it, it's in your bloody name. And it is about relationships. And I think we can get so caught up in individual ways of working, then we forget that we're in a bigger ecosystem. And actually, we need to connect to each other to make better relationships with each other, to make it less confusing for our families, because they're the ones, and the children, because really we're all there to make best outcomes for families, which means we're all there to have best outcomes for children. And I have to agree with what was said. We don't put children's voice nowhere near the front as what we should, because if you use shame to create change, most parents love their children. Yeah, circumstances have happened, I get that, and things have happened, but really they love their children. And when they are hearing the voice of their children and what this is doing for their children, that's usually where change occurs, because they don't want to harm their children. But we get so caught up in the adult problems that we forget that children are living this too.
Yeah.
And so we need to really raise the voice of children, so they can explain what's going on for them, because we are all connected. Children are the most sacred being, especially in our culture. And we say we put children right in the centre. By doing that, we need to bring their voice in. And we make too many advocates instead of going, actually, children are living this, they're experiencing this, and no one's asking them to talk into it or how they're feeling about it. And so we really need to start lifting children's voices.
Yeah. And I think actually, Sarah, in your presentation, it was really powerful to have the voice of the young person there say because as adults, we say that we're committed, that we want to raise voice, but I think in a very real sense, having that voice come through in your presentation was very powerful. So thank you for including that as well.
Thank you.
So we are at the end of time, and I'm quite conscious that we're going to start losing people.
No,
and you've got stuff to go back to too, Sarah. So thank you so much on a busy day for taking time out.
Thank you.
For sharing the wealth of your knowledge that you've built up. with us here. I can see we actually have quite a number of people from various government departments online as well. So I'm sure that there's food for thought, and we look forward to promoting your presentation through our various networks so that we, so that we can continue to let people know of the good work that you're doing. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye for now. Bye. Thank you, everybody.